All right, man, peace. So those of us who have been following the Colin Kaepernick narrative know that the latest turn in events has been the safety Malcolm Jenkins of the Philadelphia Eagles deciding that he was going to work out his own side deal with the NFL. Of course, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
After the NFL decided to reallocate the money slated for breast cancer charities and the Salute to Service Veterans Fund to pay for a 7-year, $89 million social justice program designed to placate protesting players, Eagles safety Malcolm Jenkins decided to end his protest of raising his fifth during the national anthem and faced quite a bit of criticism for agreeing to a deal with the NFL without the consent of nearly 40 players who make up the Players Coalition.
And I wonder who those 40 players are. I wonder if anybody can produce a roster of who those players are and what they actually represent and what they claim they wanted out of interacting with the NFL owners.
Jenkins responding to his critics over the weekend saying this: what the NFL has done is a good first step. It's not going to solve the massive problems we have in our cities and states across the country, but it's a start.
Well, of course it's not going to solve the problem that is occurring across America in regards to race relations, because there is no solution for that. The so-called black woman and so-called black man here in America, the only solution for the problems that our people have is a reinstitution of proper culture and, quite frankly, the fall of this current kingdom, this worldwide corporation. That is the only solution. There is not going to be any real placating of either side until that occurs.
And more importantly, I'm glad we're able to get them to acknowledge their responsibility and role in trying to help solve these problems and injustices. They are making a major commitment, more than they've done for any other charitable initiative, to provide us with a marketing platform to educate millions of fans about social justice, racial inequality, and the work players are doing in criminal justice reform, police accountability, transparency, and education economic advancement. For myself and the Players Coalition, it was never about the money or having our voices bought. To hear people call me or anyone else a sellout is insulting.
Well, look, here's the thing with the people who are calling Malcolm Jenkins a so-called sellout. Those are the same people who call everybody a sellout. Everybody's a sellout. Everybody's a coon except for them. When you ask them how much money have they contributed to any cause whatsoever, the answer is zero. Okay? Zero. How much time have they committed to any cause? The answer is zero. What is their plan? The answer is zero. What's their IQ? The answer is zero. Okay? You have a lot of fucking idiots out here. And I'm not saying that Malcolm Jenkins may not have had any nefarious motivations, but I seriously doubt it. I believe that he was just somebody who had an end game, who had an overall goal that he wanted to achieve, and he realized that most of the other guys who were involved in the NFL coalition were a bunch of fucking meatheads looking for attention, who were having psychological meltdowns under the inspiration of their messiah figure, Colin Kaepernick.
It has always been and will always be about lifting the voices of the people and the work of those that fight for them. Stephen A., your reaction to Jenkins?
What the hell is wrong with Ryan Clark and his hair, man? Somebody tell this nigga that he's damn near 40 years old. I can't tolerate dudes that's in that 40-year-old range that's still trying to look or act like they're 22. That frohawk, nappy frohawk look, that's for the little 20-year-old kids, man. Leave that shit to them. What is wrong with this dude? He must be going through some type of post-retirement crisis.
Being called a sellout and his response there.
I think it's disgraceful. It's not foreign because it's a problem that exists within the African American community, and I'll get to that in a second.
Well, I'm going to get to it now. One of the main reasons why the common refrain amongst the internet revolutionaries, the social justice warriors as they're called, is to call everyone a sellout, is because most of them are two-dimensional thinkers. Most of them could not think their way out of a paper bag. Most of them have no plan, and like I say incessantly on this channel, most of them just want a hug. If you were to ask the average internet revolutionary what their plan is, I guarantee you they have none. None. Zero, zip, zilch. And I keep getting inundated with emails from brothers asking me about this rapper's video where the white guy and the black guy hug at the end. Brothers, I've been telling you about that for months. That's all these niggas really want. The majority of them, that's all they really want. And this is why I stated in one of the previous videos in the 3-part series that I did when the Malcolm Jenkins storyline first broke. Quiet is kept, and it's going to bother certain people, but the main solution is going to come about when a lot of these niggas are done away with. A lot of them got to go, man. Period. People might not like it. It's okay. A lot of them have to go. And those are the main ones who want to call everybody a coon. The same ones who have no knowledge of their history and who have no knowledge of where they're going. The same dudes who worship women, the same women who worship fake hair, the same women who worship abortions and being feminist. The same dudes who talk about Afrocentrism and have either never been to Africa or won't live there. There's a massive level of confusion amongst so-called black people. And this is why it is always the confused person who wants to call everyone out and state that they claim to know what's best when they have no plan whatsoever. So, am I an advocate for Malcolm Jenkins' plan? Look, I don't have a dog in the race. What I will say is that he's put his best foot forward. He's gone out there and actually tried to make connections amongst these different police departments. He's actually tried to follow up on what he claims he wants. So I have to respect him for that. What has Colin Kaepernick done? Colin Kaepernick has stated that he's going to pledge $1 million. Is that another $1 million, or is that talking about the $1 million that he's allegedly already pledged? So what's more money, $1 million or $89 million over 7 years? I don't know. You tell me. And at the end of the day, it's not about how much money you're alleging to pledge or spend. It's about what you plan to do. What is the overall plan? Where is it going?
I think it's important to point out that with Malcolm Jenkins, Anquan Bolden, and all of those brothers, we should be very, very proud of them. I stand with Malcolm Jenkins and all of those guys who got this done. You're essentially talking about individuals who ultimately coaxed NFL owners into giving nearly $100 million to help black causes.
Well, for the naysayers, they'll say, well, they're really not giving any money. They just took money away from these other quote unquote causes. But, that's normal nigga nonsense. And I've stated this already. Most of these people are going to complain no matter what happens. But remember, before Shannon Sharpe was on TV talking about, well, how come they can give money to breast cancer and to the military, but they can't give money for social justice? Now, as soon as they take money away from the breast cancer and the military for the social justice reforms that people like Shannon Sharpe claim that they wanted, what does Shannon Sharpe say? Well, why you got to take money away from them for? Why you got to take money away from them for? Just give more money. These people are so presumptuous, they believe that they could tell other people how to spend their money, that they don't owe you.
That pertains to social injustice, racial inequality, issues with law enforcement officials. That's something to be commended for. Could there have been more done? Was everything perfect? No. But there is no question that when it comes to these brothers, their heart was in the right place. And that is where I go to the issue of being called the sellout, which is something that I'm not foreign to. It's amazing to me that this is something that we hear. When you look at myself and so many others that...
Well, sometimes for you it's apropos, brother. Sometimes for you it's apropos. You are a company man. All right? You are a corporate whore. As are people like LeBron James and many of these other so-called woke athletes. They're none but corporate whores. And I've mentioned that already in the past in some of my previous videos. So, when they get on TV and they play the pro-black angle, a lot of that is part of the image that their corporations, their sponsors want them to portray because it goes along with their brand.
That have been denigrated with such negative verbiage. The fact of the matter is that if you find folks in my situation, Ryan Clark's situation, and others, we get a whole bunch of people chirping and talking about what they would have done if they were in this situation, and all they're doing is whistling into the wind. They ain't in this position, so they can talk all the nonsense that they want to talk. But it's a problem that exists within the African American community, and it's not a secret, because when folks talk about you being an independent voice, intellectualizing, educating yourself on particular issues and then articulating and elocuting your position, what they're really saying is, we are cool with you as long as you march lockstep with us.
Well, there's no doubt about that. A large portion of the so-called black community definitely has the lemming mentality. They just follow, and they don't really even know what they're following. And social media is very good for creating and perpetuating that type of mentality. The hashtag mentality. People just join in and follow shit that they don't even really understand. Back in 2016, everybody all of a sudden became a revolutionary over 2 murders that were seen on TV. Philando Castile and Alton Sterling. All of a sudden, everybody wanted to stage a revolution. Allegedly, supposedly they did. Now, in 2017, the latter part of 2017, now it's the Me Too movement. Now it's the women with the pitchforks. Very easy to manipulate people. The woman now has the pitchfork for shit that supposedly was occurring 20 years ago. Chicks talking about somebody grabbed their nipple 25 years ago, and they're still mad about it. Here's my thing. It doesn't matter what you're about. Are you going to follow through? Are you going to follow up? Or are you just trying to go along with something because you're bored?
Even though we feign wanting independence and being independent thinkers.
Agreed. Most so-called black people really don't want to be independent. They really don't know where to start. Part of it's not their fault because most of our people have never been taught anything. But a large portion of our people just want to be seen. As I've stated, when you look at most of these liberal movements, when you see the so-called liberal black woman out there, all that is attention mongering. The number one alter ego of the liberal black woman is feminism. She does not really particularly care about her race unless she can use racial causes to bring attention to herself. That's all the Black Lesbian Matter movement is all about. That's all it's ever been about. They could care less about the so-called black man.
And that's a problem that exists within our community. Malcolm Jenkins and Anquan Bolden and those guys have done nothing, absolutely nothing, that warrants them being called sellouts.
Well, look, that is a fun refrain. It's fun for the internet revolutionary to call everybody a sellout or a coon. As I've tried to explain to some of those idiots, Malcolm Jenkins accepting that money has not changed the collective bargaining agreement. So therefore, the players who want to still kneel can continue to do so. They can still kneel and protest and do all they want. Him accepting that money has not stopped them from being able to do that. They're just worried now. They're afraid that if they continue to kneel, they're going to be viewed as malcontents. So basically, Malcolm Jenkins is making them look bad because they don't want to move forward.
If you're Eric Reed or anybody else, and I'm not saying I know that Eric Reed did that because I do not, but whatever player you are, if you disagree with some of the things that they could have done, you could speak to that. You could also sit up there and formulate a plan and have appropriate leadership.
Well, we know that's not going to happen because most of those cats are not three-dimensional thinkers. You have to be a three-dimensional thinker to have a plan, to say, here's what I want, here's how I'm going to get it, here's when I want to have it by. Most of those guys don't even have that. Once again, this is why I give Malcolm Jenkins credit. He has shown that he's focused on certain issues that he wants to be involved in. One of them being criminal justice reform, assisting former felons, doing right-arounds with police, things of that nature he's been personally involved with. Has Colin Kaepernick been involved with that? Colin Kaepernick claims that he wants to see police reform. Has he ever walked up to any police station and said, I want to do a ride-around and see what you're dealing with? Has he done that? I mean, come on, man.
Because DeMaurice Smith, last time I checked, is an African-American who happens to be the leader of the NFL Players Association, thereby licensed literally and employed literally to negotiate things on behalf of the collective body of players surrounding the National Football League. For some reason, that hasn't been the case, and that's a story for another day. But what Malcolm Jenkins and
I think that when Stephen A. says that hasn't been the case and that's a story for another day, really what he's trying to imply is that the leader of the NFL Players Association is not getting respect because he's a so-called black man. And I've touched on that sentiment before about black athletes not respecting black coaches. Once again, reform starts on an intra-racial level before it can get to an interracial level. There has to be order established on an intra-racial level before anything can be stipulated interracially. I mean, do so-called black people even have the foggiest idea of who their leadership is supposed to be? No, because they venerate the woman. And the woman is a cesspool of confusion and an agent of chaos. So you're viewing the black woman as the leader of your community, the person that you always want to talk about, taught you this and taught you that, right? Most of these black, so-called black men, black males, they always talk about how their grandmother taught them the Bible and this, and that. If your grandmother taught you the Bible, you don't know the Bible. All right? No disrespect.
and Max and Ryan, well, what Malcolm Jenkins is pointing out, it's egregious. It's something that happens in our community far too often, where if you don't march lockstep with every single thing that some folks in the black community believe you are supposed to feel, they can't just respectfully disagree with you or highlight where you might be right in some cases, but you might be wrong in others. It has to go the realm of denigrating and demoralizing and name calling.
Because, Stephen A., once again, most of the brothers in the so-called black community have never been taught how to think on a three-dimensional level. Everything with them is emotional because they get all that energy from their mothers. All right. Even you get a lot of that energy from your mother as well. So, turnabout is fair play.
And belittling. And that's something that has worked against our community for many, many years. The NFL owners are not the ones that are guilty of issues with law enforcement officials or social injustice.
Well, I've been saying that for the longest time. The NFL owners have nothing to do with the issues in the so-called black community. So that whole thing was a red herring. Even Kaepernick never stated that he wanted something from the NFL owners. Never once. Most of that bullshit came from Shannon Sharpe. And a lot of these simpletons in the NFL ran with it.
They're not the ones being protested against by the players. And folks need to wake up and recognize that.
What is particularly galling if you're Malcolm Jenkins about being called a sellout? Well, here's a question. I'll make it real simple. How much of the $89 million is Malcolm Jenkins pocketing? None.
Zero.
Right? Is he getting some special title? No. So what exactly is he getting out of this? Because Malcolm Jenkins stood up or not. Well,
according to the quote-unquote intelligentsia of the internet revolutionaries, supposedly he must be getting some money under the table because, quote-unquote, every time a black man rises up, somebody comes to stab him in the back because, Colin Kaepernick was supposed to be the new leader, the new revolutionary leader to lead our people to the promised land, according to these clowns on the internet, right? And the so-called pro-blacks. Supposedly, Colin Kaepernick was the Messiah figure.
Knelt at a moment in time where that entailed personal and professional risk. In fact, he put his money in so doing where his mouth was.
Exactly. Malcolm Jenkins has spent more money on the causes that he believes in and that he adheres to, more money than he's gotten from the NFL owners.
That's not a sellout. Now, as you said, Stephen A., reasonable people can disagree in this kind of age-old debate about how to go about reform. Do you work within the system to bring about change, or do you stay outside the system and pressure it that way? And reasonable people can disagree. Not everyone has to agree with working within. But that doesn't mean someone's a sellout. And in this case, it turns out it was pretty effective. So for someone to call, especially a social justice warrior who just got results, like Malcolm Jenkins, a sellout, it is an egregious error in decorum. No question about that. The idea, by the way, that X number of players didn't agree with how they proceeded. So let me get this straight. You need perfect unanimity in a large labor union or among many protesters in order to proceed?
Well, they need that if someone is taking energy away from their godhead, that being Colin Kaepernick. Now, if Colin Kaepernick were in Malcolm Jenkins' place and certain players had disagreed with what Colin Kaepernick was doing, it would have been the reverse. They would have said that a lot of those players were selling out Kaepernick. See, that's the power of the cult of personality. Because Malcolm Jenkins is the figure who has usurped Colin Kaepernick. Now it's Malcolm Jenkins who's the traitor and the sellout. But had it been Colin Kaepernick who had taken the deal, all the other players who had, who would have said that, no, we didn't agree with what Colin is doing, the internet revolutionaries would have stated that all those other players were the sellout. When you have a cult mentality, when you are now possessed with infatuation over another man or over another person, period, I mean, there's really there are no lengths to which someone will go to try to justify a constant belief and adherence to the purity of what that person is doing.
There's never perfect unanimity. You form consensus, and the power in the group is that even if you disagree with something, you go along with it. Or maybe there's a split, as I mentioned last week. Sometimes that happens when like-minded people are working toward a goal. They don't always agree on everything.
Hey, for those of you brothers who read the scriptures, when you read Acts of the Apostles, Paul and John Mark had a difference to where they had to go their separate ways. It happens.
Trump, never Trump. Bernie, Hillary. It happens. So Malcolm Jenkins, I don't blame him if he is especially galled by this charge. It is a galling charge.
Yeah, so he reached out to me on Friday, and this was something that really bothered him. He said he wanted to just kind of, first of all, just behind the scenes, get this push behind him so they can move forward into doing some of the things as far as social injustice, criminal reform, the different things that he has been fighting for actively, not just holding a fist up during the anthem.
Thank you, sir.
And he made the point that selling out would be if some of this was about the money. But for him, it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about pocketing anything. It wasn't about getting a title. It was about in some way amplifying the voice of the players to take it from the protest to actual progress.
So in other words, he wanted to go to phase 2, which most low-level thinkers, they don't know anything about. See, our people, they want to march with signs for perpetuity. They wouldn't know what to do if many of the quote-unquote white elite actually wanted to meet and speak with the protesters. They would not know what to do other than grab their bullhorn and yell and scream and throw tantrums.
And so for me, being a part of the CBA, you hear Stephen A. talk about the CBA a lot and what the NFLPA decided to do. I thought this was a divide and conquer thing. I thought this was some way the NFL decided to move in to the players and separate them.
Well, the reason, the way that I knew that this was never about divide and conquer is because you guys never had a leg to stand on. When I say you guys, I mean the protesters. Please understand, if the NFL owners wanted to, they could have just cut everybody who was protesting. Like, it wouldn't have been that big a deal. There would have been a little bit of controversy, but if they would have engaged in a purge, then, it is what it is. They could cut anybody whenever they want. Like many of these protesters and these faux pro-blacks that are in the NFL, they were under the misconception that they had some type of leg to stand on. Like, we deserve this money because of how much money you're making. You guys are equal partners in the CBA. They don't owe you anything. They don't owe you any form of assistance to fix your own problem. The problems that our people have are our problems. And when you constantly try to put the onus on the so-called white man, really, the only thing that you're reinforcing is that he's above you and that he's your daddy. So there was no need for any divide and conquer tactics. Like, that doesn't make any sense. I think they were just trying to get it behind them. At the end of the day, this whole situation was very, very, very bad for business, for everybody involved. And the idiotic fans who sit back and don't really understand the money system, they're cheering everything on because they're fans of chaos. Colin Kaepernick was an agent of chaos. And Malcolm Jenkins was somebody who clearly was not an agent of chaos, at least from the standpoint of wanting to perpetuate this protest. He may be an agent of chaos in another form, who knows? But it's very obvious that he wanted to move forward, that he has some form of rationale in his mental. And the owners saw that and they said, okay, we can deal with this person. Look, no matter how much you dislike or distrust someone, when you're dealing with people who operate at a high level, they're going to respect some form of cognitive functionality. They want to understand how your brain works and know that it works so that they can speak with you and communicate. When people are losing money, it doesn't matter what color you are or they are. They want to go back to making money.
So they could win. And Malcolm said, but RC, that wasn't it. It's us. And you think about the CBA negotiations and you think about the many things that players try to get done or that many of us in the black community try to get done. So many times it's us holding us back.
Thank you, sir. Now, I did a video with Kevin Durant where I spoke on that issue. The only real form of oppression is self-oppression. Once you get over self-oppression, you'll realize that these other people, they don't fucking matter, man. They just don't. Like, I did a video with Rigondeaux and Lomachenko, and I got a lot of these white people coming on, oh, yeah, another black guy who was over it. Like, and I see brothers going back and forth with these people. Like, all that stuff they do that. It's like an ex-girlfriend who texts you some dumb shit 3 months after y'all ain't even together anymore. The only thing that people like that show is how infatuated they are with so-called black people. And you're feeding them. Okay? You're feeding them. They're maggots. Maggots feed on carcasses. If you don't give them a carcass, they're going to die. All right? They're not fucking relevant. Most of these people, they're not relevant. None of them really are relevant. That's why I focus my channel on a certain demographic. And brothers have to learn how to focus beyond all this ancillary bullshit. These people who don't fucking matter.
It's the bickering, it's the infighting, it's the crabs in the barrel, because we feel like there can only be one spot. In this, there's spots for everybody. In this, so...
And hey, I said before, and even Damian Woody touched on it, what really mattered? Is it the protest and the cause that you allege mattered, or was it who got the credit? Because when you worship people as gods, then it becomes about how come Colin is not getting the credit. That's what you see with people like Michael Bennett and some of these other guys, Russell Okun. They were more concerned with getting Kaepernick back in the league.
So much needs to be done. So much needs to be said. So much work. So much stuff needs to be put on the ground. It doesn't have to be one person. And so
it can't possibly be one person. Not only does it not have to be, it can't possibly be one person. If you're trying to solve these issues from a carnal perspective, it cannot possibly be one person. The real issue is that these are spiritual issues that our people have. Number one, a lot of our people going to have to be removed out the way. And number two, there's going to have to be a reinvigoration of culture and proper mindset. All right, but a lot of our people have to go, period.
And so for us to be fighting about which person makes the decision, is it the right decision? Is it the way to go? That's something you talk about in the room. That's something you deal with as family. But when it comes to being a united front, which we need to be, because social injustice is the reason this started. Making a difference is the reason this started. And this is actually making a difference. This is more than the NFL has done for Salute to Service, My Cause, My Cleats, breast cancer. I think it's a step in the right
breast cancer awareness.
Right, I think it's a step in the right direction. And for us to have this conversation again sets us back from where we need to be going.
Well, you know what? That's true, Ryan Clark. But let's be honest. Before you had that conversation with Malcolm Jenkins, I'm pretty sure that you were also on the sellout wagon train, which you yourself admitted at the start of your statement, until he called you and cleared it up. So it's good that you were able to humble yourself. But brothers have to learn how to understand things automatically without having to speak with somebody directly. It shouldn't have to be that Malcolm Jenkins has to call you for you to understand certain things. Now, I understand there being a certain amount of suspicion. But if you're a three-dimensional thinker, you have to at least say to yourself, okay, well, it's possible that he could have been working with the NFL in some type of diabolical or nefarious capacity. But at the end of the day, if I'm going to look at this from a rational perspective, he was the only one who seemed to have a plan or an end game. So could it possibly be that there was a split because there were just different visions for what they wanted involved? I've yet to hear what Eric Reed had planned for the NFL coalition, the Players Coalition, that he claimed to be a part of in representation of Colin Kaepernick. Now, Eric Reed claims that he's going to go along with Kaepernick and team up with him with some of his social justice programs that he allegedly has planned. We'll see. But at the end of the day, it doesn't make Malcolm Jenkins a bad guy because he split from the plan that many of the players had in their mind in regards to what Colin Kaepernick allegedly wanted, which seemed to be more based in a vendetta against the NFL owners than anything productive.
Well, let's call it what it is, Ryan. It's embarrassing. It's absolutely embarrassing. And not only that, the reason why I keep bringing up the Players Association, Ryan, is not to blame anybody. It's to highlight there's an African American that is the leader of the Players Union.
Well, see, I already touched on that. I figured that was where Stephen was going. And I understand his sentiment, but at the same time, it has to be understood that, and I touched on this in another video, not only is there an issue in the so-called black community, a gender issue between the so-called black man and the black woman, there's a generational issue as well. Many of the younger so-called black males don't trust older so-called black males. Why is that? That's a reflection of the feeling amongst many younger black males that the older black males have failed to lead them, have failed to inform them properly. They pretty much left them out here to figure things out for themselves. Once again, that's another reason why I have this channel. because I know for a fact that many so-called older black males don't know shit, but they always want to run their fucking mouth. And also, let me say this, a lot of young so-called black males don't know anything and they don't want to listen. So it becomes a comedy of errors. But I do understand why, or the possibility of why, many of the players may not have trust in the leader of the NFL Players Association.
Yep. So the social injustice, racial inequality, issues with law enforcement officials, it affects DeMaurice Smith just like it affects the rest of us. Me, you, and anybody else. Just like we speak, he could speak. Just like we have a voice, he could have a voice. And because he's connected to the NFL in some capacity, that, by the way, is very significant, that can't be ignored. But ultimately what it comes down to, and black America is going to have to stand up and look at this for what it is. Nobody has to say it. I'll say it. The reality of the situation is this. When we look at the damage that has been done to our community, okay, this is one of the issues, Max Kellerman.
Yeah, but you know what? Look, it gets really hackneyed, so-called black people talking about the damage that has been done. A lot of the people who say that don't even really comprehend the damage that has been done. And the way that I know that they don't comprehend the damage that has been done is because their vision and their outlook for what their alleged solution is not based in the reparation or the repair of what was actually done. In other words, I'm saying this: if you get a leg injury and you go to the hospital and they're, the medical staff there are tending to your arm, yes, they're tending to you, but they're not tending to what's wrong with you. So it's very clear that the medical staff doesn't know what they're doing, or they don't understand how to treat you. When so-called black people keep talking about the problems in the so-called black community, but they're addressing it in the wrong way, that shows me that they don't truly comprehend what the problems are. If you don't comprehend what the problems are, you cannot comprehend a solution. Our people have a very corrosive and acidic infatuation with the Caucasian. That's the main problem. Our people have put the Caucasian on a pedestal as an idol. This is why our people constantly seek their validation. This is why, as I tell you brothers all the time, they seek out that hug. Our people are not self-defined. Everything trickles down from that. Why is that? Because our people look at other members of our people with suspicion and distrust and a total lack of faith in any sentiment that they bring forth, because our people have been trained to only look towards the Caucasian, particularly the Caucasian male, as a problem solver, as an administrator, as a leader. And this is why I make these videos about do black athletes respect black coaches? What does the black coach represent? An authority figure, a leader. All right. This is why I always put the onus on the so-called black man to be a three-dimensional thinker. You should be as knowledgeable in as many topics as you can. All right. You should not shun away from information. And also, our people have to work on their decision making. I always gear all my videos towards the man, never towards the woman. All right. The so-called black woman, all women, period, are followers. They're going to follow power. If the so-called black man wants respect from the black woman, he has to have his mind focused on power. What does power mean? Power basically is your ability to make your own decisions to affect your life according to what's best for you. Nobody else makes the decisions about your life other than you. That's what power is. Now, when you go beyond that, it's the ability to influence other people's lives and then have them actually not have a choice, but to allow you to influence their life. That also is power. But that's on a whole other level. The so-called black man does not even have power over himself right now. He doesn't even have power over his own mind. The so-called Caucasian man and the so-called black woman have power over the black man's mind.
That may ultimately highlight it. Because whereas folks from the Jewish community, the white community, the Asian community, or anywhere else may disagree on issues per se, they're not calling each other names. They're not, That's
not true. That's not true. There are many divisions amongst these other races. Our people just don't know about it. All right. So-called East Indians from India, they have an issue with East Indians from Guyana and Jamaica and so on and so forth from the Caribbean. Right? So-called Dominicans, they don't get along with Puerto Ricans per se, right? In the quote-unquote Hispanic community. When you look over in Europe, you have a lot of intraracial wars that are fought. They just don't call it that. You know, that's a whole other topic. That's a whole other video for another day. But when they use the term black on black crime, that's really an attempt to reduce any issues between members of the so-called black community to color, quote unquote, as opposed to an actual problem. See, when the Irish go against the English in the British Isles, they don't call it white on white crime. They call it Catholics against Protestants. When the Croats go against the Serbs, they call it a Muslim against Christian. They don't call it white on white crime. You understand? Over in the Middle East, when the Shiites go against the Sunnis, they don't call it Arab on Arab crime. They call it a religious issue. It's only amongst so-called black people in America that they use that term. Why? Because there's a reason for that. They don't want you to return to your culture, and they want you to adhere to that corporate designation known as black. Why? Because that keeps you infatuated with the people known as white.
I disagree. I disagree with that.
What?
I disagree with that, guys. I understand why you might perceive. Yes, I understand why you might perceive it that way. Because if you are a member of the group that you want progress for, especially if you're a member who's been affected of it, you will notice the divisions and how that is not always helpful. I just want to say I don't think that's unique to African American people in their struggle.
Agreed.
I mean, it happened during civil rights, by the way.
Stephen A., we understand that you have it, but you made an erroneous statement. It's only fair that you give the man the right to correct you because you were incorrect.
I was saying to you, I said I assume, but then you corrected me and you say no, it happens in your community as well. Fair enough. Let's say this: it's not as publicized.
That's a much better point.
When it comes to the black,
and I wouldn't even say it's not as publicized. I would say it's not depicted in the same way. As I've already stated, when they depict these other cataclysmic conflicts that one could say are quote unquote intraracial, if you were to go by the racial designations of today, they purposefully do not categorize it in that way. All right. A lot of people don't know that the Palestinians and the people who call themselves Israelis and the people who call themselves Palestinians in that region, they share the vast majority of DNA. Most of them are the descendants of Turks who came and intermixed their seed line with some of the people who were there already. But they're majority Turkish, most of those people. A lot of the people in the northern part of Africa have a lot of Turkish DNA, so on and so forth. Point being is this. They will tell you that it's Palestinians against Jewish people or Israelis. When those people are basically, they have a lot of the same DNA. But they won't call it Turkish on Turkish crime or some of the other examples that I gave already. The Chinese and the Japanese fought a war. They called it the Sino-Japanese War. They didn't call it Asian on Asian crime. Right? North Korea against South Korea. They say that it's capitalist versus communist. They don't call it Asian on Asian. So a lot of it is how things are depicted. Right? Like oftentimes they'll say, well, how come black people always kill black leaders? Well, you'll find that most leaders in various races are killed by someone of their own. When Julius Caesar was killed by white men and Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy, McKinley, when Ronald Reagan had an assassination attempt, it was by a Caucasian man. John Lennon was killed by a Caucasian man. These are things that happen. Nobody calls it white on white crime. So that's how you nullify that silly argument. It's really just about how they choose to categorize people and how they choose to deliver the message.
Black community, and you got names to attach to it. You call a cat sellout because they don't agree with you. That's not something that I've seen bloviated and just illuminated over headlines and things of that nature. I don't see that getting attached to individuals or the individuals from specific communities. That's not to say it doesn't happen, because you would know that better than me in terms of what transpires.
Can I say
to
something
the Jewish
quickly
community.
about that?
I'm saying it's an issue with our community. It's an issue.
Stephen, Stephen A., I want to say something. Okay, we're going to get a break, and I want to say something quickly about that because I think it's important.
All right.
Sure.
We'll take a quick break and we will come right back to that. So earlier we were having a conversation about Malcolm Jenkins being called a sellout. He called that insulting. Ryan Clark's still here with us. And Max, you had a comment on that.
I do. First, I want to make sure I didn't interrupt Stephen A. to where, Stephen A., you couldn't complete the thought. You know, I understand you were, it's just a point I want to engage with.
My point was that I'm not aware whether that happens in the Jewish community or not, in terms of folks sitting there calling each other names, denigrating folks just because they disagree with.
Well, Steve, you do know that in the so-called Jewish community, they do have a lot of separations in regards to how they interpret the Torah or the Talmud, so on and so forth. So this is why it's important for people to be informed about what they claim to speak about before they speak about it. The problem with Stephen A. is that Stephen A. has been the recipient of a lot of vitriol from the so-called black community because of many of his comments. And some of his comments he does deserve to be the recipient because he is a corporate whore. Nothing against the brother. He's intelligent. He does make many good evaluations. But at the end of the day, he does worship money. And he finds great incentive in sticking up for the corporation. And that's fine. But then you have to be very, very careful when you choose to speak about societal issues, because people are going to call you out on your affiliations.
What I'm saying is you would know that better than me when it comes to Jewish folks, white folks, maybe what have you. It's just not something I see illuminated in the headlines. But in the end, as it pertains to the African-American community, Ryan Clark would know about this. One of the things that we talk about periodically is what we would label the Willie Lynch syndrome. Look it up.
No, Willie Lynch, well, you could look it up, but Willie Lynch, that was a piece of propaganda that was created in the mid-'60s. All right, brothers? I mean, you guys can read that and you can go along with it if you want to. But the Willie Lynch letter is an example of why I say this is not a pro-black channel. All right? Pro-blacks believe that even if they tell a lie, that if they believe that even if they tell a lie, if it advances what they believe to be the proper route for so-called black people to take, then it's good. The Willie Lynch letter was something that was fabricated in the mid-'60s to try to explain a lot of the quote-unquote divisions that our people had and why they had them.
It up. A former slave owner in the 1700s talking to slave masters about how to control the slaves and keep them in line by...
Well, once again, Stephen A. is showing why he's really not equipped to speak on issues outside of basketball. It's nothing against him, but he's just uninformed. All right? The Willie Lynch letter is something that was fabricated.
By the divide and conquer, the divide and conquer methodology. And all I'm saying is it's something that gets attributed to the African-American community periodically when stuff like this happens. Malcolm Jenkins is doing a good deed. Is it perfect? Probably not. Did he fall in line with everything everybody wanted? Probably not. But at the end of the day, his heart was in the right place. He was trying to do the right thing. And whether you agree or disagree, he doesn't deserve to be called a sellout. And it seems to be a default position that some folks within the African community go to. People go to war over stuff like this.
Yeah, but you know what? Look, when people use that term sellout and coon, you already know for the most part, they're just talking on the internet. For the most part, they're just talking. So, let them go. The word coon is a feeling of empowerment. It's a way that they feel empowered. As I've stated, most of those people who use that term are two-dimensional thinkers. They're really not knowledgeable. They don't really know they don't really understand what they're looking at. So they go based on their feelings, which is a very, very base way of interpreting things. And they use that term to feel empowered. Most of the time when they call people coons or sellouts, they cannot really expound on it because they don't really know why they think what they think. They just go on based off of their base emotions. So I really more feel sorry for those people than anything else, because those people are usually very, very easy to manipulate.
Within our community, which Ryan Clark would attest to, Max. That's what I wanted to say.
I don't want to give that point the short shrift. If there are African American men right now who I'm talking to on television talking about that dynamic within a community, of course, I understand, and that's something that you want to address it. What I'm saying is that is not unique to the African American community. That happens in all communities, or many, many communities, and it happens in many kind of organizations of like-minded people who are trying to get a certain result, who want to pull in the same direction, but they have different ideas about how to get there. And what I'm saying, Stephen A., is not to be bamboozled into thinking this is unique to the African American community and somehow this community has an extra special problem that other communities and organizations who want to affect change don't also have.
Well, I agree with Max to a degree, but the so-called African American or so-called black community in the Western Hemisphere, they do have a series of issues that no other group of people have, because beyond any other group of people, they're the most ignorant in regards to their history and their culture. All right. That is what sets the so-called African American community apart from everyone else. And the way that you know that that's a fact is because across the world, every other race and culture knows that the so-called African American or so-called black people of the Western Hemisphere have been disassociated from their history. This is why it's very common, no matter where you go across the planet Earth, for the so-called black man or so-called African American man or woman to be the recipient of, quote unquote, to be as the scriptures call it, a proverb and a byword. Almost every nation has a separate slur for the so-called black man of America. All you have to do is do even a little bit of research, whether it's China or Korea or Japan or India or the Middle East. All of these different areas have some form of a derogatory term for the so-called black man of America. And I don't say that in any attempt to cast the black man in a light where he deserves mercy or remorse. I don't believe in that. I believe that the only respect that's necessary is self-respect. When you have that, everyone else will be forced to give you your respect because you'll stop asking them and begging them for acceptance. But for Max Kellerman to say that the issue that the so-called black man in America goes through is pretty much equivalent to what many others go through across the world, I wouldn't quite agree with that. Even if you were to look at Australia and Tasmania, New Zealand, where you have the indigenous aboriginals who have gone through many of the same things that our people have gone through, even they have a more self-assured knowledge of their history and culture than the so-called black man and woman do in America. All right. So to me, they're the closest approximation. And really, most dark or indigenous people across the earth have been ravaged and decimated by Caucasian imperialism. But the so-called black man and woman in the Americas are the ones who have been the most disassociated from their history and their culture. I don't really believe that that's something that can be disputed.
This is what happens, and if you take a look at how the sausage is made, it is ugly, and it turns a lot of people off, and it's not clean.
I'll let Ryan
and
go
this has
first.
happened since time immemorial with all different kinds of groups that have come together to fight for a common cause. It's not unique.
I'll follow up on that, Max, in a second after Max.
I agree with you for sure, Max, in that it's not unique. And obviously, if you are a part of that community, as Stephen A. and I are, you're going to be more, you're going to hear more about it because it's something that you are fighting for. It's something that you are paying attention to. But I do think it's very recent history in which African Americans have been fighting. It's very recent history in which civil rights was a very important part of the African American culture. And we have seen so many times within our culture, not just in the name calling, but in the fight for progression, the community finding ways to pull others back, to pull others down. And I think in this situation, I want to see that move forward. I want to see that progress in a different way. And I think another part that is large.
Well, the main way that the progression is going to happen is that the undesirables in the so-called black community are going to have to be removed out of the way. All right. And I keep coming back to that theme. A lot of these Negroes got to go. And I know that a lot of people may not like that. It is what it is. It's okay. It's okay. But a lot of these people got to go. A lot of these Negroes have to go. Period. How that's going to happen, certain things according to scripture are going to transpire in the last days. This is why many people out here in this society are pretty much being fattened up like lambs for the slaughter. What does that mean? They're embracing a lot of Luciferian ideologies, witchcraft, pansexuality, etc. That is the spiritual method of fattening people up for the slaughter. Okay? So don't marvel when you see the black woman talking about, I don't care about these niggas. I'm a lesbian now. Don't marvel when you see young boys that are faggots now. Don't marvel at it, because that's the Most High fattening people up for the slaughter. So the scriptures tell you, just like in the days of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Largely miss when you talk about the African American community. It's very small. You know, some of these other, whether it's white people or the Jewish culture, there's usually a larger amount of people. It's a very small group of people when you're dealing in the United States, when you're dealing with African Americans. When you're talking about it happening, there's more spots.
And I mean, if we really want to get controversial, there's nothing against Max Kellerman, but he claims to be Jewish. And I've had people who've been commenting on my channel recently talking about so-and-so's not Caucasian, they're Jewish. Like, you have this sentiment amongst many so-called Caucasians where they try to differentiate themselves from the Caucasian Jews. All of them came out of the Caucasus Mountains. Okay? They started out in Mount Seir, and a large portion of them migrated up into the Caucasus Mountains of Central Asia, per se. Or, central western part of Asia, the Russian steppe, per se. All right, they migrated up from Mount Seir into that region, and you had migrations that came forth out of there. Right, so some of them became known as Slavs, some of them became known as Turks, some of them became known as Jewish people, those being the Khazars. Some of them became known as Mongols. They all came out of the Caucasus Mountains. Okay, but all that is another video for another day. The point being is that there is this attempt by many Caucasians to try to create a differentiation between themselves and Caucasian Jews. They're the same people. You guys are just different tribes. All right? So that's the issue with that.
And more spaces in other cultures than there is for African Americans. And so in some way, we need to find a way to progress forward from the name calling, from the infighting, and there will be. But when you get an opportunity to show your front, when you get an opportunity to be in front of people, to somehow be united, to somehow find a way to move forward with the disagreements, with the arguing, with the finding ways to come to a common ground, and when you show to other people having a united front based off of how you move forward.
Here's where I want to close this out. Max Kellerman, Ryan Clark, I make a mistake from time to time in terms...
No shit. You make a mistake from time to time on every episode.
In terms of how I communicate in this respect. I don't mean to give the impression that something is taking place only in the African American community. I'm telling you, that's where my primary concern lies.
Well, then you should have said that from the very start, brother. The issue is that you're ignorant in regards to what goes on in other communities. I really don't expect you to know what goes on in other communities, and that's fine. But then don't speak about other communities as if you know. You barely know how to handle the issues in the so-called black community. All right. What you're qualified to talk about is what goes on in the NBA, because you're not a historian, and I don't expect you to be. But these are the type of things that happen when you try to mix societal issues with sports in conversation.
And that's where it comes across. In the United States of America, as we speak, we all know that the African American community is considered a desolate and disenfranchised community.
Because it is. Has been totally deculturalized.
In comparison to others. The white community is large, over 66% of the population.
Allegedly.
We are no longer even the dominant minority. The Hispanic community makes up about 17%. We're at about 13%. If you look at the U.S. Census Bureau report from a couple of years ago, it projected that the Hispanic population would double from like 15 or 16 million to like 32 to 34 million by the year 2039.
Well, they've been saying that for the last 30 years. A lot of those are fear tactics meant to really just meant to intimidate so-called black people. First off, there's no such race as Hispanic. All right. People who are classified as Hispanic basically fall under so-called black Hispanics, so-called Caucasian Hispanics, and so-called Mongoloid Hispanics. That's another corporate title. I'll probably have to do a video on racial designations, because I always see brothers ask me, why do I say so-called black and so-called this and so-called that? Those are just corporate titles, brothers. All right. That shit is not real.
Whereas the African American community would only increase by about 1 million, which means that you're surmising.
Well, shit, it could increase by a lot more if the so-called black women stop having all them damn abortions. But those are things that people don't want to talk about because you're too busy trying to get a hug from the fucking white man.
That people either are going to drop dead or they're going to be incarcerated.
Yep.
When these facts are put out in front of everybody, the important point for everybody to understand is that because we're not even the dominant minority, because we're the lesser than dominant minority, the numbers supposedly are projected to dwindle. We have to pay attention to the fact that we're climbing uphill and we're battling uphill.
Please stop it, brother. Y'all not battling shit. You're not battling anything, right? To say that you're battling means that you're going against someone. The main entity that the so-called black man is going against is his damn self. Am I saying that the so-called black man does not have people trying to stop him? Of course, there are. But the main thing that the so-called black man is going against is his damn self. You're not going against anyone else proactively as much as you're going against your damn self. Because our people don't know shit. All right? So when our people become informed, then we'll stop worrying about all of these boogeymen, all these stats that say that we're going to be outnumbered. It's not about number, because the so-called Asians represent a far lower quote-unquote minority than blacks, and they have a far more powerful clout economically than anybody else in America economically, even more than many Caucasians. You know why? Because they have a strong culture. That's why. So it's not a numbers game. It's a knowledge game.
And statements like this against Malcolm Jenkins, or anybody else for that matter, have a far more profound effect on our community than it would of somebody else's. That's all I'm saying.
Appreciate your authenticity on this subject, all of you gentlemen, but we have breaking news.
Oh, well, bump all the breaking news. It is what it is. All right. But I'm sure that there are going to be some further developments in the Malcolm Jenkins, Colin Kaepernick narrative. We'll see what happens. I see that Colin Kaepernick has crawled out of his rabbit hole, as I told you, brothers, that he would around the time that his book was coming out. I told you, brothers, he's going to come out of that rabbit hole once it was time for his book to come out. And now all of a sudden he's making appearances at award shows with that other monarch child, Beyonce. And that broad looked like she was creaming in her dress. She looked like she like Jay-Z, better watch out. She might disappear in the back with Kaepernick. Broad's voice was cracking and all that shit. So what's going on with this broad? I thought she could have another you in a minute. Now all of a sudden she fiending for Kaepernick. But anyway, peace.